Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
We are going to be going over the interim CSIS chief labeling parental rights advocates as extremists in a recent report, Liberal MPs wanting protective zones for Canadian politicians, RCMP finding that foreign interference has increased 600% since 2018, Immigration Minister admitting that gangs exploit Canadian immigration vulnerabilities, Biden dropping out of the race and endorsing Kamala Harris, as well as Bjorn Lomberg taking on climate alarmism at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. However, if before we get started, you wouldn't mind subscribing to our channel and tossing a thumbs up on this video as it greatly helps this podcast grow, that would be appreciated. All right, let's get started. First off, we've got the interim CSIS chief labeling parental rights advocates as extremists in report. The new interim director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Vanessa Lloyd, has stirred controversy with a report labeling pushback about gender ideology as a domestic security threat. The document suggests that exposure to anti-gender extremist rhetoric could incite serious violence against those supporting pro-gender ideology. Earlier, documents from the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center had similarly categorized the freedom movement alongside extremist groups like QAnon and neo-Nazis, noting that anti-2S LGBTQIA+ rhetoric is prevalent among such groups. However, the CSIS report did not address violence faced by those opposing radical gender ideology, such as attacks on parental rights protesters. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. If you don't think men can be women, you are a threat to Canadian national security, according to our intelligence agencies.
An extreme threat, Liam.
Yeah.
An extreme threat. Look, this country's in such a bad place that our military is being run by a woman who spearheaded the DEI department in the Army, who reported that the issue with the military was colonialism, racism, and heteronormativity. And now our intelligence agency is being run by a woman who not only lacks a clear understanding of basic biology, but believes that if you don't buy into a delusion driven by mental illness, which is what this thing is, and you aren't willing to subject your children to it, you're dangerous to society, and Canada should label you an extremist. Like, tell me your country is not a complete mess without telling me your country is not a complete mess. And look, this has nothing to do with women. This is just what's happening right now. I think this is to meet DEI quotas for Trudeau himself. The reason I say that is like Tulsi Gabbard, I would give her both of these roles. I think she'd be phenomenal at them. She's got the experience. She's got a great head on her shoulders. Danielle Smith, she could be the prime minister. In fact, she might be someday. I think she'd do an excellent job. But these women that are kind of wholesale purchased into this liberal ideology, they're dangerous and they're being put in these positions to meet these quotas. And here's the problem. Here's the actual issue I have, other than exactly what's happening right now. She's interim, right? When we do have a conservative government, which we will, a lot of the people that are actually a part of the operational apparatus, i.e. the head of CSIS, the head of the military, are these people that were brought in to meet DEI quotas and have bought into the liberal ideology. So if we don't fire the head of every department that espouses this nonsense, will Canada even really change? Will we recover?
So you just made me kind of think of something interesting there about saying how it's not because of women, but I think this is actually something to do with the feminine kind of ethos taking over. Like, society over the last couple of decades has definitely gone in a very feminine direction, right? Everything is about care and compassion.
Well, yeah,
of this, right?
You can't make men and women equal if the men don't become more feminine.
Yes.
100%.
So one thing that we should consider in this is the difference between female and male psychology. And this is all across the animal kingdom, not just humans themselves. In a feminine worldview, in a female worldview, you essentially have three different sectors. You have caretakers, you have the protected class, which would be children, their offspring, and then you have threats. And so if you don't fit into a caretaker position, you're considered a threat to the protected class, the children, right? Well, what we've kind of done is started pushing all of this, that worldview onto the entire society. So you have the protected class, whether it be the LGBTQ type of stuff, you have allies to that group, and anyone who's not an ally is a threat.
Yes.
And that's exactly, and I mean,
that's a good point.
They're even putting this out there right now straight up saying like, yeah, you're an extremist threat. You're a threat to national security.
If you don't buy into wild mental illness-driven gender ideology.
If you don't protect this helpless class.
Well, not even that. If you believe in parental rights, which is what she was reporting on, that to me is so wild. I don't care if anybody's a part of the LGBTQ community. Do your thing. I'm happy for you. I'll support you. Go nuts. I don't care. Don't include kids. Don't push your stuff on me. That's all. That's the big thing. And those are the lines I think we've crossed. But to your point, I actually think that's an interesting perspective, and I totally agree with you. But to what I was saying is, it's not the woman. It's maybe the feminine culture driving it, or So you had a guy, I forget his name before. I should know that. The CSIS director before was a male, but he was still enforcing a more feminine strategy here, because these people, like in the military and CSIS and all these, they were run by men before, but they were still employing these more feminine strategies. So it's not really whether it's a man or a woman. It's more about where the general ideology for that group is coming from. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then if you look at it from a more masculine angle, the masculine ethos is kind of a little bit more focused on competition than caretaking, right? It's we're going to compete against one another in whatever sector, or whatever industry, or whatever game is taking place, essentially. And we're going to measure who the other one is. And that kind of establishes a dominance hierarchy. And usually men submit themselves to those dominance hierarchies pretty freely.
I think they know. Guys know. Like women, what's interesting with women is they don't play the same game. So I think they have a more difficult challenge, a more difficult time understanding their social hierarchy. Guys know almost right away. You walk into a room and like 90% of the time, you know exactly where you fit in and what's going on. You know where your challenges are going to be, and where, you know what I mean? Like it's such a weird thing it's baked into guys. We just know exactly how that's going to work out, usually.
You'll sometimes get into some physical altercations. And I think this is actually another thing that differs with kind of men and women in the way that they see the world a little bit as well, is when men come to confrontations, there's kind of that always underlying threat of violence, of if you push too far, we are going to handle this physically. But once women enter that equation with men, that is all of a sudden off the table. So now you don't really have that recourse of, okay, when things go too far.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not advocating that it shouldn't be that way, but I'm just saying, like, as soon as there's women involved, we all of a sudden have a very different line that we can never cross.
Yes.
And so this, to me, like, I look at this and seeing the clear threat to children, because again, puberty blockers, they are, when they're used for this purpose, they're actually used off label. So that's not their intended use of what they were developed for. Their main use is usually to treat cancer patients, prostate cancer patients in men. And then also the secondary use that they've used them for is to chemically castrate sex offenders in prisons.
They will use these things to block puberty, though, in the past, but they'll do it to push puberty off on purpose for a reason. So they will do this. So when I was a kid, like, I'm not a giant, obviously, I'm 5'7". When I was a child, I hit puberty late, like 15. I think it's probably close enough for guys, but that was kind of late for me. I went and saw an endocrinologist. At the time, they're like, I was all of 5 feet tall. They're like, hey, look, you're not going to be any more than 5'2", 5'3". I'm like, well, that's fucking devastating. At least I'm still good looking. But it was hard for me. And what they offered, though, they go, well, you can take this, that basically a puberty blocker, but you'll take it for a year and you'll push it off, which should give your body more of an opportunity to grow. That was kind of the strategy. Now I was like, hey, look, at that time, I was like, this seems unsafe. I looked into it. I was like, this is not a good option. I'll just play the cards I was dealt. No big deal. Obviously things went a little better, not a whole lot, but a little. But I do know that they are
5'3.5".
I just said I was 5'7". I did have the option to take those. I chose not to do it, but I do know that they have been used for that purpose. But it was a very unique situation. I don't know how many other people would ever even be put in that scenario. And I can't actually think of any other reason why they would even give them to kids at that time, but they were available. And I'm the only person I know that was offered to, but it is a thing. It was a thing. So I'm not really trying to defend what they're doing now. I'm just saying that there was a reason or a purpose that these things were in play at an earlier time. It's a wild misuse, especially for how they're doing it, especially at the scale they're doing it. But it was in the conversation 30 years ago.
Well, you talked about the negative side effects. We know that there is negative side effects to blocking hormone productions. It's not a good thing to have your hormones out of whack.
No.
And so some of those issues can be changes in libido, poor bone health, stunted height, low mood. So it's really weird that they would prescribe it for height, essentially. But anyways, low mood, tumor-like masses in the brain, and for those treated early enough who continue on to cross-sex hormones, almost certain infertility. So these things can completely mess up your entire biological system.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that if you sit here and take any issue with this movement or say, hey, I think we've gone a little off the deep end here or gone too far, then that you're considered a threat to national security is wild. And let's be real. What do they do to people that they deem threats to national security?
Take them out.
They either imprison them or they
take them out.
Yeah.
You and quotes like just what do you know what I mean?
So, okay, I'm supposed to just feel okay that my government now would put me into that basket simply because of not coming on to their ideological position, which, let's be real, this isn't an ideological position that humanity has had for all of time. This is something that is very, very new, which you can poke holes through left, right, and center. But if I don't subscribe to your new way of thinking,
I'm an extremist.
I'm an
dangerous.
extremist.
And what's crazy to me is like this rhetoric's been going on for a long time. And we've seen a lot of groups and organizations and governments and whatever. And Trudeau says all this dumb shit. But we kind of know he's a little bitch in the sense that like he can't do much to you and I. That's not where his power lies. But now you have people that are in charge of the intelligence agency. They have a lot of weapons they can use against Canadian citizens, which they do. And now this is the woman that's running it. It is pretty concerning. You know what I mean? Like you kind of look at like the path Canada's going down and what that looks like. It's not good. Like it doesn't make me want to stay here. It doesn't make me want to raise my family here, you know?
Yeah, especially when all of a sudden the concept of parental rights doesn't exist. And actually, we even saw a couple months ago, right? There was a NDP MP who said that parental rights aren't a thing in Canada.
Yeah.
He straight up said it. This is one of our elected representatives saying in a professional setting that parental rights don't exist in Canada. How like citizens should not feel okay with that at all.
No, absolutely not. And it's again, that's my concern. And what I feel like Trudeau's doing is I feel like he's stacking the deck in his favor before he leaves.
Yeah.
His Senate is stacked, which you and I both have a problem with how that operates. And now he's stacking all of these organizations with people that align with his ideology. And I just think it's going to take this country down a bad road. And I think it just makes it harder for us to correct course, which is so frustrating. But I guess it is what it is. Actually, to your point, it is kind of interesting that I was offered puberty blockers. I'm wondering if the idea would be to just stave it off long enough and then go through it because your body does grow pre. And then you kind of do your big growth spurt through puberty, right? So it's like, kids obviously grow before puberty. Kids are, however, going to be 5 feet tall before they hit it. And then they have these big growth spurts. I'm wondering if he was like, well, maybe you'll be 5'2", 5'3" before you hit it, and then we'll let it go. You know what I mean? I'm wondering if the people that have that lose height is if they don't get off the puberty blockers and they don't go through the process properly. I think the whole thing's out of whack. I think it's super dangerous. I think it's wild that I was even offered them when I think about it now. But I got to think that's the only thing that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't figure out much sense in that, to be honest. But yeah, like I don't know. It's because even you look at that and you go, testosterone is in men, especially. You look at what that does for muscle growth, bone growth, it's pivotal. I'm
wondering if, think about it like this. I'm wondering if this was his thought process. And I'm just trying to unpack this because I actually don't know. Now that you said that, I'm kind of like, oh, that's actually interesting. You grow X amount. And then let's say when you hit puberty, that's what you have in this package. Your puberty package comes with, say, a foot of growth for some people. That's what you get. It's going to happen. This is kind of how they maybe process it. So maybe you have a little more objective in their sense. So as soon as you hit puberty, 2-3 year process, the guy grows a foot, right? So maybe what they're trying to go is, okay, all we want to do is we want to push this down the road 1 or 2 years and let you do more growing beforehand because we know we have this 1 foot in this box whenever you hit puberty. That's all I can think of. That's the only thing that would make sense to me. Again, I never fucked with any of them. I was just like, it is what it is. This seems fucking incredibly dangerous. I'm out. But I'm just wondering if maybe that was their thought process.
Yeah, who knows? I don't know. I'm no pubertyologist, so.
Either way, we're here today. I'm 5'7". Just leave it alone. It's fine. Everything's fine.
I'm just of the mind that usually more often than not, when you interrupt nature's process, it usually has a bunch of unintended consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was in the 90s too, right?
Yeah.
This is late 90s. So I mean, I don't even know what kind of results they had to sort of support the guy's hypothesis. I have no idea. I just know like the whole situation for me was slightly traumatic and I was like, fuck no, I guess I'll be small. Anyway.
All right, moving on to our second story for the day. We've got Liberal MPs wanting protective zones for Canadian politicians. The former public safety minister, Marco Mendicino, is advocating for the creation of protective zones around political constituency offices to safeguard members of parliament and their staff from increasing threats and harassment. Mendicino calls for politicians to collectively raise the standard of political debate, warning that failing to address these issues could lead to more political violence and deter good people from entering politics. He remains committed to advocating for measures to prevent such outcomes. So, do politicians deserve more security funded by the taxpayers?
No, I mean, this was a piggyback, obviously, off the Trump assassination, right? But my opinion is mostly nonsense. I mean, besides a pie in the face in 2006 and some gravel thrown at Trudeau for being the worst prime minister in Canada's history, Canadians have not been super violent. There was one gun violence in, I think, 2012. Someone was killed. It wasn't the MP. Otherwise, it's not really how Canada rolls. Politicians are just being harassed because they've driven this country off a cliff in every way imaginable. I mean, look, life is completely unaffordable. Crime is through the roof, and there is no sign of these things improving. And this is all a result of bad leadership by people who were elected. They deserve an earful. Like, they do. This is what you get. You know, this is the job you signed up for. Do a good job, because we don't have anything else we can do. You're not held accountable. You don't lose your pay. You don't go to prison. You're not shot in the woods. I think you said that last time. That was kind of your game plan. You know what I mean? So for us, what else have we got? And now they want to take away our ability to express free speech against them in these zones. So a Fraser Institute study suggests that Canada could reduce income taxes for most citizens and still balance its budget if it cuts spending by 2.3% over the next 2 years. The report proposes that by reducing federal spending by $11 billion annually, the government could achieve a budget surplus by 2028, down from the projected $39.8 billion deficit this year. In other words, we're just suffering almost solely because politicians want to have more. That's basically what this is about. Of course, people are pissed off. That's exactly what's going on. This is an easy fix. You know what? There will still be problems, but cutting government spending would make a significant difference for Canadians. So yeah, of course, people are pissed off. I mean, not to mention, honestly, 100-meter safe zones will not stop any real violence. So basically, it's what I said. They just don't want an earful for doing a shitty job.
Yeah, well, he even says, right, it's criminal penalties for harassment and intimidation. So it's not even just physical violence that's actually perpetrated. It's words.
It's beacon at people, beacon off. Yeah. But the thing is, if you're going to commit a crime, you're already committed to breaking the law. Yeah. You don't care about a safe zone. Come on, bro.
And I also think that, yeah, harassing politicians is a public service. Yeah. I think like it should be a thing.
100%.
Well, you also look, okay, how can democracy, which they claim to love so much, how can it properly operate if there isn't pushback against the politicians? Like, okay, I'm just supposed to vote between a handful of people every 4 years who there, again, I don't even think there's any one person in this planet, let alone the 5 choices you give me, that can represent me as a person in my views. I will disagree with almost all of them on a bunch of different things. But now you say that, oh, I can't come down on you. And like, we know this too, right? And it's hard because you can say, okay, I don't think people should get actually harassed, but then let's look at what they consider harassment. We just saw covering that last story, right? If you don't agree with my ideological positions, you are a threat to national security.
You're an extremist.
You're an extremist. So if you don't agree with me, you are that. I've dealt with this before.
Yes.
Where these people say that if you don't agree with me, if you don't support my worldview, if you try to counter my ideas, that is a form of harassment. And this actually goes to something I think much deeper as well and more important is, like Carl Jung once said, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And we really need to separate. And I think people need to stop identifying with their political beliefs.
Oh, it's so dangerous.
Because then you start thinking, like, if you identify yourself as a, say, liberal or as a conservative, then when somebody brings about real critiques of either liberalism or conservatism, it feels like an attack on you because, well, that's part of who I am.
Yep.
Don't allow yourself to identify with these political labels.
I would go one step further, and I would say, one of the biggest human faults is over associating with anything, whether it's I'm a doctor, I'm this, I'm that, I'm intelligent, I'm good looking, I'm a liberal. Look, none of these things are going to serve you. They're only going to limit you. If you're a doctor, you're going to be, what baggage does it come with? Well, I know better than you. Really, because medical science and all these things are changing rapidly. Don't tell me because of your title, you know more. You're going to limit your opportunity to be better. That is the problem. That is anytime you over associate with any label, you limit your opportunity to be a better human across the board. It's got to stop. I think people just have so much trouble with it because you sit there trying to define yourself and find your purpose in life and create this image of yourself because everyone wants to have that. And it's interesting. You meet people, and you and I were talking about this earlier today. It's hard to be around people that don't see the world the same way. And for me, I find it hard to be around people that don't live in reality. You know what I mean? That aren't self-aware. That's hard for me because often people have built this image of themselves and it's very delicate. So you can't have real conversations with them. You kind of have to live in this superficial world. Otherwise, you're going to shatter a component of them that they're not willing to let go. And I just find in general, like most people, probably 80% of people suffer from this in one way or another. And look, I'm not perfect. I can always improve too, but I've come a very, very long way. And I do know the benefits of letting go.
And another aspect with this as well is you look at these people, they say, okay, you can't harass me, but look at what you've done to me. You locked me in my home for years. You completely shattered my economic future in this country. You've made it to the point where Canadians growing up have just given up on the idea of home ownership, which was the very way that people were able to create wealth in their life and would be pretty much their entire economic future is through their home. Through your policies, you've completely shattered that. So you have actually infringed on my ability to survive in a prosperous way. But me saying, go fuck yourself for doing that is whoa. We need new laws. We need to stop you from doing that. No. It's your laws and it's your overregulation and it's your rule, which is actually having real physical consequences on this world, not just emotional harassment or whatever.
Honestly, man, these guys need more pies in the face. I feel like they do, legit.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the RCMP finding that foreign interference has increased by 600% since 2018. According to the RCMP, there was a 468% increase in foreign interference-related incidents between 2018 and 2022, reaching nearly 600% by mid-2023. This surge led to a rise in RCMP investigations from 31 to 182 over the 4 years. The RCMP identified China as a key actor in these activities, aiming to further its political, economic, and security interests at Canada's expense. The agency is tackling threats like harassment, intimidation, and electoral interference. An ongoing public inquiry investigating Beijing's alleged meddling in Canada's 2019 and 2021 elections noted China's influence diminished voter ability to make informed decisions. So is the Canadian government actively turning a blind eye to this foreign interference? How does it get so that this bad if somebody isn't benefiting from it?
Complicit. Obviously they are, right? In fact, I mean, this increase only really points to one thing. Like I said, a complicit government. And otherwise, what would motivate or allow such a dramatic increase in interference? The Liberal government is either deeply involved or intentionally turning a blind eye because they're compromised in some way or another.
That's the only thing that I can come up with. Well, I mean, and we know this too, right? That there is now reports of people in Parliament actively dealing with foreign nations and being treasonous.
Yeah, what happened with that? Everything just kind of fell off. Everyone just kind of gave up on that for now.
You know what's really interesting is when that first even broke, I noticed that when we would make a clip about it, say, it would do very well. It would get a lot of attention. People were focused on it. But now even like I put a clip out, I clipped out a piece of our last podcast where we're loosely talking about this topic, and there was like almost zero interest in it. And it's just, it's crazy to me that it really does. The news cycle just comes around and washes everybody's mind about what's going on in the world. And it's now everything that is happening is this one thing I'm being told to care about. But you try to go back to it down the road and everybody's like, oh, we're over that.
This is
like,
wild.
no. Those MPs are still in Parliament.
They committed treason.
Yeah.
This is and the thing is, they're like, oh, we'll just kind of lump it in with foreign interference inquiry. Everything will be fine. Except that inquiry, they were only given about 20% of the documents they needed. Even what's her name? Hogue, the bigger lady. She's whatever. Justice Hogue, I believe is her name.
Harassment.
Yeah. So basically, Justice Hogue said, "You're not giving me the documents I need to do my job." She's like, and what's funny is that was the same time she goes, "They're definitely compromising the elections, for sure, but it didn't change anything." Well, first of all, how can you say one and the other? That doesn't make sense. And then also, you only got part of the information, so how can you make a real decision on this? And that's the same inquiry where all this treasonous MP information is going. So how much of that are they going to get? 3% of that? This is never going to get dealt with. It's wild. And like I said, it's all just gone. No one even cares anymore. I mean, I know they do, but it's just, I don't know, man.
What's crazy is it is important to have trust in your institutions if society is going to operate properly. But I look at this and just think, how do you expect me to have trust in any of this? It is a problem if in a democratic country where you hold free and supposedly fair elections that people believe in that process. That is extremely important. But like, what are you giving me to have faith in that system? I can't anymore.
I have nothing anymore. As long as the liberals are running this country, I don't. And my concern is, what does it look like when a conservative is? How much can he actually change? Because like every policy they've put into place is a mess. Like even now that so funny, I called this out. I don't know, maybe it was the last podcast one before, the $10 a day childcare. Now that's under fire by the AG. They're like, no, this is a fucking mess. You've basically nationalized childcare, except you've made the operations financially untenable. This is not good for anybody. You're crushing this industry. So now that's going to be audited. It's like every policy that the liberals have, there is a problem with everything because there's always an ulterior motive. I'm doing a piece right now on the foreign interference bill, C70. It is riddled with problems, and it's going to be more focused on suppressing Canadians than it is foreigners. So for me, like everything these people do, I just don't trust them anymore. And then they have these operations and these organizations where they basically get away with it. They are the judge, jury, and the executioner. And if they don't like the way it looks, they do it behind closed doors. And they just tell you whatever they want to say. And they continue to get away with these things. How can you have any, not only like, how can you not have trust in the electoral process? Just the whole institution at this point is completely compromised. I don't know how we fix it because all it does is benefit the person in power. It only benefits their party and the people in power. So someone has to come in and be super benevolent to want to change all of these things because it's only in their favor.
Are you starting to understand why I don't think the state should exist, maybe?
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the other thing I was thinking too when you were saying that earlier. If the state continues to do these things and they continue to break the rules and they continue to not use democratic processes to actually adjudicate these matters and have people held accountable, how are you going to stop lawlessness? If I can't put food on the table, you can break all the rules and I can't do anything. I can't even go harass a politician for doing a shitty job. Why don't I just start my own? I'm going to start my own militia, my own little mafia. I'm a WAP. I can start a mafia. Let's go. Start bootlegging wine. What do you got? How are you going to stop that? Like, because people don't have any respect for law or authority anymore because they put themselves in a different class. And that's how I feel. Obviously, I'm going to leave this country before I do that. Obviously, it's not a good path because I want to raise my family and I don't want to be in jail. And I think if you do that, you kind of have to be committed to doing it. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to rob a bank and you carry a gun, you got to be willing to use it. So if you're not willing to kill somebody, don't rob the bank. Anyway, how do they feel like they're going to be able to stop people though? And you're seeing rampant crime anyway right now. But just for the average Canadian, you look at the system. This is how you have a revolution. This is the kind of shit that happens before you have a revolution. And I just think the system is so broken and it's so one-sided that I don't know how we take it. I don't know how we lay down and take it. I don't understand.
Look at the government as an institution. They get more power and resources in order to deal with problems, right? Well, that just means you've now created an incentive for them to create problems.
Yeah.
And look, like you were just talking about there with Bill C-70, okay, we're going to allow a hostile foreign nation to come in and undermine our democratic process, and that will create the vector for which we can create new laws to deal with foreign interference that will be weaponized against our own population.
Exactly.
And this is something that I've pointed to a lot as well in public discourse. And this is what I despise is people are much less concerned with breaking up this machinery that is definitely at this point causing mayhem and so many problems, rather than just, oh, well, I just want the person who makes me feel good in charge of that machine. And
I feel like people
the machine itself is the problem.
I feel like people are starting to wake up. Because they're suffering. They're not okay. There is no Canadian dream anymore. There is no way to do it here. Like, it used to be 1 in 10, now it's 1 in 1,000. And there's just no way to get by here anymore. It's just like, what are your options? If you take a job, if you work, this is an interesting statistic. If you are in the average earner in the top 10%, so not number 10, not number 1, the average in the top 10% of earners in this country cannot qualify for the average mortgage in this country.
Jesus.
So when you see something like that, you go, oh, this is very broken. There are certain stats you can pull. And that was one of them where I was like, oh, that is a signpost that this is so done. This economy is such a disaster. How does this country repair? And it's kind of like, you've said it before, when, you see these currencies that go through hyperinflation to try to fix these problems. It's like, how close are we to something like that? You know what I mean? And what does that even look like, in the modern Western world these days? What is the chaos that ensues when something like that happens?
Yeah, it could get pretty shaky. And again, it's so crazy because you talk about these things about how the inevitable effect of society continuing to go down this road is revolution. And that's not even me condoning it. That's just, I think, an inevitable fact that's going to happen here. And people, if you don't recognize that, things can get really hairy really quickly if we don't think about the fact that we are on that path if we don't change course.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm hopeful. So we talked about this yesterday. You and I talk a lot. I'm hopeful that Pierre Poilievre gets in and is the guy that you and I think he is more of a warrior than he is right now. I think he's playing the political game, playing within the Overton window, but then kind of breaks that open and continues to make significant changes for Canada. And look, I'm not saying one man's going to fix the country, but you need a strong leader. And if this guy gets in and he's who we think he is and he runs the country for 10 years or so, Canada might have a chance to turn around. It might. It's just that the first term is going to be so painful for so many Canadians. I don't know if he'll get a second. And what happens if he doesn't get the opportunity to get through that second term and really bring a lot of these things to life? If he doesn't, I think Canada might be in trouble for maybe at least this generation. Like 20, 30, 40 years. I just don't know how it repairs, because you're at this inflection point, right? Where, you either do the right things and you can correct course, or you skew the timeline and everything's a mess. And I don't know how you repair it. It's like we were going to pass the point of no return, would probably be a good way to put it, So I'm hopeful. Just, realistically, I don't think there's a great, 25%, maybe 1 in 4.
Yeah, well, people always ask us too, right? Well, what do we do to stop it? I don't know if you really can. I think on a societal wide level, a lot of these things kind of operate with inertia, where they continue going until something bursts the bubble. Individuals on their own won't be able to do that. However, what we can do as individuals is prepare for it. And so I don't think it does anybody any good to stick your head in the ground and pretend like that's not the path that we're on.
Yeah.
But then this is even a decision. I know we made this decision for different reasons, but that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to get out of Toronto, was because I thought, if things keep going this way for another 5 years, shit could get really hairy. And when things get hairy, I don't want to be in an urban center.
Not at all.
That's
the first one.
Yeah.
That'd be the first domino. Toronto is absolutely the epicenter of all the nonsense.
And so what you can do is decide how you are going to react to those things and what position you're going to put yourself in order to deal with them if they arise. Now, I hope we can avoid this. I'm not completely black-pilled or hopeless on that front. I do think there is certain things that from a social level, from a governmental level, we can start doing, or it's more about stopping doing certain things that the government is doing, like mass spending and all of this sorts of stuff, and mass immigration and whatever. But yeah, as an individual, I think your choice is just to essentially brace and prepare. And if you do that, then the collision usually doesn't have as much damage if you're prepared for it.
The way I would put it is this: like, I don't want to seem hopeless. So I always say, if you want institutions to work for the institutions. Great, and that does make sense. And I think that is a really good thing to do, especially at the local level. I think that's significant. I agree with you, though. Know how you're going to manage a situation. Are you going to get out of the city? Are you going to get out of the country? What are you going to do so that you're going to be okay? But here's the problem. You could have 100 amazing top talent, top tier people get into local politics, right? They could do so many positive things. But if we don't stop mass immigration, if we don't stop massive spending, just those two things alone, just those two things, this country is ruined. It doesn't matter what those 100 people do. It doesn't matter. If you let in another 3% of people every single year from all over the world, we are going to lose our cultural identity very, very quickly. Everything's going to be a fucking mess. The economy, if you don't stop letting these people in, the economy is going to continue to struggle, especially because housing is the number one thing that is sort of driving this economic issue right now. And immigration is making that significantly worse. And then the spending. And the spending from the government right now, like I said earlier in that report from the Fraser Institute, if we don't curb this, we're going to continue running out of deficit. So it kind of, as much as I want to say get in and do the work, it only works if we have a strong leader. Because that person right now, they have the power, just from those three things I said, to absolutely just dumpster fire this country for the next 100 years. And that's kind of my concern. It's like, so I don't feel hopeless, but I don't feel hopeless, and I think people should get involved, and I think people can make a difference, and I think people need to know what their exit strategy looks like for sure. I think those are all key things. But if we don't have good leadership at the top, repairing those few things that we just touched on, which I think you and I are going to talk about later, I don't think the country has a chance.
Well, there's that old saying, right, of good times make weak men make hard times make strong men make good times, right? It's like, well, we're just headed into that era where weak men have created hard times.
Yes.
And then these hard times can make strong men who are capable of making good times. And so to me, it's one of those things where that's where the individual responsibility comes into play of okay, I need to become more competent. I need to become more capable of handling the problems that are arising in my life, not necessarily stopping the world from having problems because they're always going to exist. But this is even something from a state perspective, right? Is that when individuals start feeling helpless and that they cannot take care of their own lives and direct their own fate, they look to cede authority to somebody else in order to do that for them.
Right.
And that is always the government. And if you look at the rise of totalitarian regimes, they always happened when there was a mass sense of hopelessness and despair. And when somebody would rise up and say, I've got the solutions to this and I can strong arm these solutions into place. Now, what I like about Polyev is because I think some people will point to people like Polyev and say, well, that's what he's trying to do. He's saying that he's got the solutions. But actually what he's saying is that the government doesn't have these solutions and the government needs to stop pretending it does. It only makes things worse. And we need to shrink the size of the government. And, I think one of his talking points or slogans that he says is, I want to lead a government that does a few things well rather than a lot of things poorly.
Yeah.
And so anyways, what ends up happening is when individuals can become strong, can become capable, then it actually just doesn't allow for the possibility where the state can step in and say, I'm going to solve your problems for you, because you can say, no, I'm good. I'm able to solve my own.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess the challenge I have sometimes is, will we be given the landscape to operate that way with Canada and where it's going? Will you actually get that opportunity? Will you be, yes, you can deal with your own problems, but can you flourish? Can you raise a family? Can you feel safe? Can you have opportunity? Do you feel like you can make a difference? Do you feel like your life has value? Can you do those things in this country if that's the landscape that you now have to play in? Because you think about it, a lot of people, they flee countries that are going down, that are a little further along down this line. They flee authoritarian governments. They flee places where they're oppressed. They actually flee places where there's no opportunity. That's what people do. That's why a lot of people came to Canada. So that the direction we could be going, my concern is, if you become one of the people you're talking about, someone that takes responsibility and is capable, is it maybe your responsibility to go somewhere else where you can have opportunity and where you can flourish and where you can be safe and I guess that's my concern. Like, I don't want to give up on Canada. But I feel like if it doesn't change course in the next few years, I don't have a choice.
We're headed towards a fork in the road, and we've got a decent stretch before we have to decide exactly what. And once we make that turn on one way or the other, there's no going back.
Yes.
And there is still a lot of runway on that line, but I do think it's about 2 years, 3 years.
I think it's a 2-3. That's what I'm saying. That inflection point is coming where you can repair things and you're okay. It was a bumpy ride, but you got through it, or you're total dumpster fire. And I don't know how it fixes itself. And it's like, bye for a generation.
I guess that's where I'd like to just say to any listeners is, just keep an eye on which way that car is going, whether which fork in that road it's headed towards.
Yeah. And be ready for it. And be ready.
Yeah.
Be ready. This podcast is brought to you by Higher Healths. Today, I want to talk to you about something that's made a real difference in my health journey: organ supplements. If you know me, you know that I'm a bit of a health nut and that I'm always looking for the best ways to improve, especially as I continue to grow older. And this is where Higher Healths comes in. Higher Healths sources their organ meats strictly from Canadian regenerative farmers who raise 100% grass-fed and grass-finished cattle. This means you're getting the purest, most nutrient-dense, freeze-dried organ supplements possible. In a world where modern diets often leave us with nutrient gaps, these organ supplements are bridging that gap. I've been taking these capsules daily to keep my energy levels high, improve my quality of sleep, and my overall wellness. But it's not just me. My wife has been taking them too, both as a prenatal and postnatal supplement, and she's felt incredible benefits as well. So if you're looking to enhance your health and fill those nutrient gaps, give Higher Healths a try. Trust me, your body will thank you. Check them out at higherhealths.ca and use the promo code BLENDR. That's capital BLENDR for a 10% discount on any bundle purchase. Higher Healths, connecting people to real food.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the immigration minister admitting that gangs exploit Canadian immigration vulnerabilities. So Liberal immigration minister Mark Miller acknowledged that gang members are exploiting vulnerabilities in Canada's immigration system and entering the country undetected. Miller admitted that sophisticated criminal organizations, regardless of the country, often bypass Canada's immigration requirements. Miller highlighted that unreliable police certificates from certain countries allow criminals to slip through. So in terms of top 10 issues causing Canada's downfall, where does unchecked immigration fall on the list?
I mean, it's certainly a leading symptom of a terrible government, right? And I think if we don't get under control in the very near future, it will be a primary reason that this nation unravels. Culturally, economically, and while it may be an unpopular statement, I think crime and chaos are close behind. They're going to follow suit. And we've seen this repeatedly around the world. I mean, most recently, you sent me something from Leeds, England, in the UK. And it was mentioned that it is a multi-ethnic neighborhood, and they chased dozens of police officers out of that neighborhood while lighting the whole street on fire. Double-decker buses.
Flipping cop cars.
It was pure chaos. And on multiple occasions, they chased full cop vans out of there by throwing everything they could find at these police vehicles. I mean, it's tough. I mean, this is what happens when people have no respect for the country that they've emigrated to, or when they want to impose their own. So I think if we don't get it under control, we're in real trouble. I think actually it might be the number one thing that could bury the country if we don't get this under control.
I think yeah, it's I think to me top two. We were just kind of touching on it, but yeah, it's mass government spending and mass immigration. Yeah. Those two things are fueling, I'd say, I think we've talked about it before, the whole 80-20 rule where you should focus on doing 20% of the actions that get you 80% of the results. Yeah. And then you should also focus on 20% of the issues that are causing you 80% of the headaches. And this is that. You fix these two problems, a lot of other things start falling in line. Totally. I think those are the beginning of the domino effects. And I think we posted a clip the other day, which is hilarious to see. Yeah, the gangs exploiting these immigration things where now, yes, criminal organizations that are operating on an international level are just seeing Canada as a massive market cap for them, essentially, that they can take advantage of. Where it was one of the police chiefs of the Peel region, and he was talking about how they let somebody out on bail for car thefts, and the guy stole a car in the court parking lot on his way out immediately after letting him out. So this whole notion that people make I think we talked about it in the last episode that it's like, oh, well, if we just gave people the proper social security nets and they make it out to seem like all of this stems from a poor economic scenario. It's not. People are systematically taking advantage of these lax immigration
They're seeing
laws.
opportunity, 100%.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy to see that it's, now backfiring, and even the federal immigration minister, his office was vandalized overnight with smashed windows and graffiti both outside and inside the office. He condemned the attack as criminal and noted that no one was injured. However, the vandalism is believed to be connected to recent pro-Palestinian protests outside of the office, which, I mean, it's not just, yeah, sure, they can say believed to be, but when you realize that the vandalism was directly pro-Palestine.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Look at the writing, literally the writing on the wall.
What's crazy is now they're gaslighting us about this as well, right? So, okay, immigration is causing increased levels of crime and violence. And then if you go look at some of prominent left-wing Twitter accounts in Canada, I noticed that multiple people were claiming that this was a result, this exact instance of this vandalism was a result of conservative rhetoric, right? They're blaming it on, oh, well, it's the right-wing rhetoric is what's dividing this country and promoting violence. What are you talking about? This is obviously people that have immigrated here from another country protesting violently about issues that are happening in another country. And then you're saying that right-wing people from Canada are to blame for it?
The problem we have in Canada is whatever the liberal megaphone says, anybody who just consumes mainstream media believes, because we do not have a balance in our media operations here in Canada. There's no two sides of any story here. It's just one. So the liberals do this all the time. They're like, okay, how are we going to say this to make us look better and the conservatives look bad? Because there's nothing they can do other than use social media, which siphons people based on their interests. You don't really get a full audience there. That's the only tool they have. And also, there's no news on social media now anyway because Bill C-18. So you kind of look at these things and you're like, yeah, obviously this is completely 100% a liberal problem. This is the result of their doing. However, all they have to do is say that in the media, it's the conservatives' fault, and then they score points. That's it. It's so broken.
Yeah, and we are kind of living in just different realities at this point.
Yes.
People aren't even it's crazy. Yeah, you can go outside and everything is objectively the same, that how we experience it, but the story that we tell ourselves about those experiences changes everything. And man, some people's stories are just fucking crazy.
Well, they're not living in reality.
No.
Like we said this before, like there's a dragon and there's a slayer. I consider myself the slayer. And the reason I'm saying that, just for a little context, is because you look at the problems in the world and then how do you sit here and argue, and be part of the divisive rhetoric, which you and I are, if you're not right, because everyone thinks that they're right. And I kind of look at this and I go, no, look, the filter that I use is purely just logic. They are the dragon. We are the slayer. I'm not politically tied to really, obviously I believe in conservatives right now more than the liberals, of course, but that's because I have to. I'm sort of politically agnostic. I don't really care which party. In fact, to your point, I wish there were no parties. This government's a total disaster. But we see this from a perspective of going, we have to fight this. There's no other way to take it down.
And something that happens, we were talking about people's ego getting wrapped up in their political beliefs. What happens is, too, when you support political policies or certain movements that end up creating a massive amount of problems, people will never be able to turn around and say that, yes, okay, these policies are causing issues because they supported the creation of them and then by and large creating that problem. So a good example would be, for instance, going back to the gender ideology stuff, a parent that has transitioned their kid can never believe
they won't allow themselves.
They will jump through mental hoops no matter what.
Oh yeah.
They will go into pure delusion in order to save themselves from the reality that they have chemically castrated their children, or in a lot of cases, even just surgically castrated them. And so you can't, as a parent,
No.
you can never tell yourself that you did the wrong thing, and that you not only did you just make a mistake, but you literally ruined your child's life.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a personal story, not a big deal. I don't care. Obviously, I wasn't vaccinated for COVID. I had COVID. So when they're telling me to get vaccinated, I was like, well, tell me another disease that I've already got that I get vaccinated for. Well, you have no good answer. And then there was a litany of problems beyond that. But that was my first initial, like, what the fuck are we talking about here? I remember having this conversation with my mom because I was vaccinated as a kid. Obviously, I was a baby. I don't know what the fuck was going on. But I wouldn't get vaccinated for this. She took offense to that. Like, well, I didn't do anything wrong with you, Jonathan. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm like, I never said you did, Mom. But because I refused to get vaccinated for COVID, but I was before, she immediately felt attacked. Well, I didn't do anything wrong to my children. I didn't do anything wrong at all, Jonathan. I'm like, Mom, it's not where I'm going with this. We're good. You are taking offense to something that has nothing to do with this right now. But just to that point, like even my own mother, you know, if you even challenge being vaccinated as a kid, which to each their own, do your thing, your parent, like I firsthand can tell you what that looks like. It is like a blind faith in their decision. They will not go back. And not because they want to believe in it, but they didn't want to harm you.
Yeah.
That's really where it comes from.
Yeah. And so look, that's admirable in a sense, but that it's like, yes, okay, you didn't want to harm us, but if that is what's driving your ego and not allowing you to change your mental map of the world and how it works, or what's good and what's bad, or what right decisions should be made, then you're going to continue making the wrong decisions. You're going to continue making bad decisions if you're not able to admit to yourself that you have made a wrong decision in the past.
I think it's particularly challenging with your children because you are in charge of someone else. You are in charge of another human. And I have a little boy. And if anything ever happened because of my decision not to do something for him, God, that would, you can't forgive yourself. It's a totally different realm. It's kind of like, you know, this is a dumb way of looking at it, but I mean, it's kind of like you can make fun of me, but don't make fun of my friends. Don't give them a hard time because then I'm going to rip your head off. It's like you're a little more defensive of those positions. And it's the same thing with your kids. Like if I do something stupid to myself, which I've done a lot, no problem. If I do something stupid to someone I care about, that's tough. That's really tough. I would maybe even I'm really good about this, but I might even do some mental gymnastics to try to convince myself for a little while. And I admittedly, I haven't, but I could see me doing it.
All right, let's move on to the next story. We've got Biden dropping out of the presidential race and endorsing Kamala Harris. As expected, President Joe Biden has withdrawn from the 2024 presidential race. However, unexpectedly, he has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. This move has stirred questions about how the Democratic Party will proceed with the nomination process. Biden made the announcement on July 21st, stating that he wants to focus on his duties as president for the remainder of his term. He praised Harris as his best decision in the 2020 election and called on Democrats to unite behind her to win against Trump. With Biden stepping down, the Democratic Party now has until late August to finalize their nominee for state ballots, giving them a few weeks to make the necessary arrangements. Harris is likely to become the nominee, but the Democratic National Convention in August will be crucial in formalizing this decision. So should Democrat voters be upset at the bait and switch that just occurred and not potentially allowing the voters to choose the head of the party?
I mean, look, like you said, we all knew this was coming, but if I was a Democrat, I would be pretty upset right now. The Democratic Party elites essentially bypassed the primary process. They waited until Joe Biden had secured the nomination and then replaced him with basically their preferred candidate, which is interesting. So they dragged it out as long as possible, in my opinion. They waited until the RNC had completed their nomination process and their VP process and then decided what they were going to do. They really did steal the decision away from voters. I mean, for a party that constantly says Trump will destroy democracy, they sure seem like the party living up to that narrative. Now, from what I understand, there was going to be a mini primary where a few more names were going to be added to the mix, like Newsom, Clinton, maybe even Michelle Obama. And when you look at Harris and Obama, they check all the Democratic DEI points necessary. And I know Obama has repeatedly said, I'm not doing it. I still will not be surprised if she jumped in now. I said this almost 2 years ago. I think she's the person that could beat Trump, and she has polled better than Trump a number of times. So I think if they want to have a chance, that's probably their best opportunity. But from my understanding, whoever gets put into this mix, only a small number of people will actually be the ones to choose the Democratic nominee, which is really a complete bastardization of democracy, right? They're saying, without saying, vote for the machine, not the man. right? They're saying vote for the team of Democrats who, quite frankly, are ruining that country. And this is why, in my opinion, they need to be defeated. I hate when they say like, oh, this person's a threat to democracy. This kind of proves that they've hijacked democracy. This is kind of what that looks like. They ousted RFK Jr., who I think would have been a great choice for them. And they did that by manipulating their voting system. If he had stepped foot in 3 states, every vote that stepped foot in that state, every vote would have gone to Biden. Not only in those 3 states, but 3 other ones as well. See, inside these parties, they can make their own rules. And that was one they made. And RFK Jr. did the math. Basically figured he would have to win 80% of the primary vote to actually win. But like, sure, it's within your own little club, so you can do whatever you want, but it is for choosing the Democratic nominee. Why can they do those things? This really is the party that looks like they've hijacked democracy. And I think they're trying to convince Americans that it's for their own good. And I hope they see through this.
There is this rule of kind of projection, right? In politics is first label the person that you're opposing with all the negative things that characterize you so that they have to defend themselves. Because if you didn't do that and you didn't say, okay, XYZ person is a threat to democracy, so therefore you need to vote for us. Well, on a level playing field, you would look at those 2 things and go, okay, this party is acting extremely undemocratic, but as long as they continue to put their opponent on the back foot and make them defend themselves against, oh, well, I'm not a threat to democracy. Here's why. Everybody's focused on that rebuttal rather than being able to look at it and go, oh, well, this is how you're acting. And going back to this whole idea of people living in different realities, when Biden couldn't hide his mental decay after the whole debacle in his debate, you realized that people really were living in this fractured reality where they thought he was a capable candidate. And for years, people on the other side of the political aisle have been saying, like for the better part of 2 years, 3 years,
pretty much since he got in,
saying this guy is not mentally fit to be in office. Even months before that debate, there was a judge that ruled Biden couldn't be prosecuted for I believe it was when classified documents, because he wasn't mentally fit. He was an old man, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
And so like even before there was a legal ruling that this man was not in the proper frame of mind to be charged as a criminal, but they still simultaneously believed that he was mentally fit enough because they just weren't exposed to this information.
What's so wild to me is, let's just take a moment and imagine a guy like Biden working in any other scenario. Working at your bar, bartending. I don't think so. Working at Home Depot. Where's he get lost in a corner turning in circles? Working as your driving instructor. I don't fucking think so. The guy couldn't do any job. You would not get that guy to do any job anywhere in the world. You really wouldn't. There's no chance. Except he can be the president of the United States of America. Come on, people. What are we doing here? And the thing is, now the question becomes, well, if he's not mentally fit to run again, is he mentally fit to stay in the position for the next 6 months?
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, he's not. And he hasn't been. And now the Democrats have to sort of find a way to convince their voters, which somehow I think they don't even care, which blows my mind, that they had not had the wool pull over their eyes. That he was competent, because this whole time he hasn't been. You know what I mean? It's just crazy to me how I'm interested to see how they try to weasel their way out of this, if they even have to. Because like you said, people associate so much with their opinions, maybe they don't even care.
Yeah, I think I do think there is just a large portion of the population, and I think this happens on both sides of the political aisle, but it is very prevalent on the left right now because left-wing leaning people have control of the media apparatus, both in America and the States. Sure, you've got Fox down in the States, but outside of that, every other major outlet is left-leaning pretty much.
Yeah, you've got a little more equal representation, but like 25-75 probably in terms of ownership and media across the whole scope.
And so I do believe that if your only source of information is corporate media, no matter the political leaning, then you're probably living in a delusion if you think that that's the entire picture.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, you actually pointed out something like these people were kind of living in a alternate reality. Guys like George Clooney, who's been a staunch Democrat, who's like, no, you got to step down. You know, Nancy Pelosi, who's 110. She's like, dude, I don't think you're fit for this job anymore. You're getting too old. These people had convinced themselves.
Dude, Seth MacFarlane at one point tweeted out that he thought Biden's age was his superpower.
Which hurts my feelings because I really like all of Seth MacFarlane's work. Like Family Guy I love it so much. And the thing is, it's actually surprising for me because if you look at his shows, he kind of challenges society's narrative and he makes fun of all of it. Yet he buys into the liberal ideology, the democratic ideology. That doesn't even make sense. It doesn't compute.
Well,
Maybe it's Hollywood.
I think it's because you look at, fundamentally humans want two things. We are social status creatures. So we first want to be able to fit into a group because groups provide us with some sort of security. We're not a lone wolf type of species. Most of us would die on our own within a couple weeks, if that. And so it's very important to us to first find a group we fit into, and then second, to seek status within that group. We want to ride the social status hierarchy. That's why we even wear shit like jewelry. There's no core value to that nice watch that is more expensive than the other guys.
No.
But it provides you with a sense of status of like, hey, I'm higher up this social ladder than you.
Yeah.
So when you factor into who a lot of these celebrities like Seth MacFarlane or George Clooney, you go, what's their social circle? It's Hollywood, which is extremely progressive.
You
it's
have
almost
to,
like
you almost have
it's
to
almost
buy
the
into
epicenter.
it. Yeah.
So, okay, if I don't buy into it, and then you get social status as well for how hard you go on that route. So if you even back off a little bit, if you falter on one of those lines, whether it be is Biden mentally fit or whether it be the gender ideology stuff, if any one of these ideas or you go against the grain, they then it makes me more right wing, which is low social status in these people's minds. Oh, it's only fucking rednecks in the middle of the country that are right wing people. So they don't take any position that could allow them to move further to the right because that would in effect hinder their social status.
It's so interesting what the Democrats and what the liberals have done to people, to continue like the things that people need to do or want to do to fit into that group. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I can't even imagine a guy like Seth MacFarlane who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars that he'd even care. Like what, and the thing is, it actually hurts your credibility when you say stuff like that. You just sound like a moron. Why didn't you just say nothing? You don't need the clout. You already have everything. It's just crazy to me that, it's just, the whole situation is just a little bit wild to me. And it's interesting having it come out now and seeing people kind of dealing with it and managing it, because people that were more neutral or conservative or whatever, we've been saying this for 2 years. We've been saying this for 2 years or more, that this guy's going to get replaced and it's not going to happen, and that who's going to be in place instead. Like this conversation's been ongoing for a very long time. It's just interesting that now they're all kind of at the table.
Well, yeah, even Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Or Vivek Ramaswamy, right? When he was running for the GOP candidacy, in one of the debates, actually, he brought it up routinely on the campaign trail, but he kept calling out the DNC saying, give us your real candidate. We know that Biden is not going to be your guy next election. So let us start actually competing against the person that we're going to compete against. Stop with this charade. And people were calling him a crazy conspiracy theorist nut, and he's delusional and all of this kind of stuff.
He's so intelligent.
And then a couple months later, all of a sudden, right, they did exactly what he predicted.
Were you the one that said make him the Speaker of the House so that he can shred America every day? Like, he's just going to eat the media alive.
He is actually.
I hope they do. That'd be so good.
I didn't say that, but I hope if the GOP wins, which it looks like they're going to, the Republican Party, then in Trump, I hope he finds his way somewhere in that circle.
Oh, that's where I'd want to see him.
Yeah.
I tune in every day.
Because
I start watching cable again.
I also think he's as ferocious as a guy like Milei, because he does talk about coming in just not, okay, well, we just need to put our person in charge of the FBI and everything will be okay. He's like, no, the FBI is out of fucking control.
Yeah.
And we need to abolish it, shut it down.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out now, right? Because Trump is actively against the deep state. He's even saying, I'm going to rip apart the deep state. It's going to be gone. Blah, blah, blah. Now, the deep state's been around for hundreds of years. Arguably, I would say it has been in some sense.
I would say what we know as the modern deep state. Actually, yeah, I wouldn't say it's been around for that long, but what we classify as the deep state, which would be kind of this like union between Washington, Wall Street, and the military industrial complex, this kind of like power circle between them. That I would say really took a hold of America post World War II.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you. I guess what I'm thinking when I think of deep state sometimes is the apparatus that actually runs the government. The things that people that actually keep things running or in control of things. That's kind of how I think about it, but you're right. I think I misspoke. I think that's a better way of looking at it. The deep state, yeah, really did come to power just post World War II.
When America tried to assert itself as the global dominant power.
Which is exactly what happened, yeah. But he says he's going to tear it apart anyway. But I also think that the Trump assassination was an inside job. I'm pretty sure, actually, based on the article that I put together and all the evidence that it was, in some sense, for sure. Now, what part of the inside? I don't know. But if you get a guy that comes in and he wants to rip this whole thing apart, and they're the ones that maybe tried to plot this assassination against him, what does that look like? How does that play out? Because it could be very tumultuous.
Yeah.
You know?
And see, this is where I'm not a big Trump supporter because, you know, he said this going in for his first term. He said, I'm going to drain the swamp, right? And it's like, well, you made no real headway on that.
I agree. But this time, first, here's the thing. I'm not a Trump supporter either, but I'm looking at what's happening here. I think he's going to do a much better job this time around. I think he's going to learn from his mistakes. He's the businessman. A core tenet of being an entrepreneur is learning from your mistakes and getting better. So he has that already built in. That's part of it. Now, his ego's in play, so it could get in his way for sure, but I'm just trying to be a little more objective about this. The other thing, too, for me, is that he's going to choose better people this time. There are better people around him, so he will do a better job. Also, what happened to him over the last 4 years? The state was weaponized against him every day for the last 4 years. So now it's not just, I'm going to do it for the people. Now I'm going to do it for myself. And a man with an ego that's on a mission to satisfy himself can be very dangerous. So he could make a lot more progress in breaking it apart. And
being, you know, within a half an inch of losing your life might light a fire under your ass. Absolutely. And say, hey, all right, if this is the game we're playing now, I'm coming at you with fire.
Cool, gloves off, let's go. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see how it works out. But anyway, yeah, I hope Vivek stays around in some capacity because I think he'll be a good leader one day.
For sure. All right, last story for the day. We've got Bjorn Lomberg taking on climate alarmism at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Climate economist Bjorn Lomberg recently challenged the prevalent climate alarmism promoted by politicians and costly green policies. He argued that while global warming is real and man-made, the threat is often exaggerated. Lomberg debunked several myths, such as the claim that the world is burning because of climate change, noting a significant decline in the percentage of global surface area burned over the past century. Lomberg highlighted human ingenuity in reducing fires and emphasized that cold-related deaths far exceeded those caused by heat, particularly in Europe and the US, where cold kills 10 times more people annually. He criticized politicians for focusing solely on heat-related issues. Lomberg also pointed out that deaths from climate-related disasters have decreased by over 98% in the last century due to technological advancements. Economically, he estimated a GDP reduction of 2 to 3% by the end of the century due to global warming, cautioning against spending 10 to 15% of global GDP to fix such a problem, which he deemed a poor investment. He labeled current climate policies as unrealistic, unsustainable, and financially impractical. He also noted that wildfires have decreased over the past 20 years, yet media reporting on climate change increased by 400% between 2010 and 2022. So why do politicians and corporate journalists continue to lie about the severity of climate change?
I think it's a big pot commitment thing. It really is the macro narrative that's being used to impose sort of all of the liberal policy, right? And we know that the West, which is changing, the wind is changing now, but the West in general has been under a democratic rule for quite a while. And this is a cornerstone, sort of a unified cornerstone between all of these people. So they kind of need this to continue to impose their policy. And like you said earlier, you can't support a policy that you're gung-ho for, then you see that it's a problem, then you back out because it becomes too much of your opinion and your identity. And there are so many policies that are put together and that are put in place rather because of this climate change narrative. But it's also ruining the economy. People are also sacrificing a lot for this climate change narrative. So no one that's a part of the liberal apparatus can really go against this. And if they don't keep convincing you that this is a real problem, they're going to lose a lot of their constituents. So I think it's a survival thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just, they want to create a mechanism for control. And this is the paranoia and hysteria that can allow them to do it.
Yes.
That people will say, oh my God, take everything from me. Take all of my rights. Take all of my money if it saves the world from burning.
And that's where the policies come in to do those things you just said.
Yeah. I actually just saw that the first fine was issued. This was in the UK, but the first fine was issued for illegally using a wood-burning stove. Council slapped a household in Yorkshire with a £175 penalty to stop making unreasonable and excessive smoke. So, and again, they have an
energy crisis in the UK.
Yeah.
And in Europe, I should say. I'm not exactly, but like not a couple of years ago, they were back to burning coal and wood because there was an issue, obviously, with the natural gas supply from Russia.
And what even Lomberg was pointing out, right, is that there's 10 times more annual deaths from cold than there is from heat.
Especially in the West.
And so are you going to tell me that this is a seasonal policy, that during the winter when people are extremely cold, that you're just going to stop slapping them with this fine?
So wild.
No, so they're going to create these policies which will make us energy vulnerable. And then if you take things into your own hands, they're going to say, no, that's bad for the climate. And what's crazy is nothing that we do, especially let's come back to Canada here for a second, but right, we are responsible for 1.6% of the global emissions for CO2, but nothing we do will make a dent in climate change. When China is on the trajectory that it is, people will make it out to seem like China is the leader in the whole sustainable market.
Who's saying that?
Oh, a lot of leftists.
They're fucking shit up.
I mean, hell,
they're opening 2 coal plants a week.
That was Trudeau's whole idea when he said that why he admired China's basic dictatorship, right? Because it allowed them to go greenest fastest.
He's a moron.
So there's this whole...
He's a wacko.
Yeah.
Fuck.
But so listen to this. So China has tripled its carbon emissions since 2000 to become the world's largest emitter and has seen its renewable energy source use halve from almost 20% in 2000 to about 10% in 2020. According to official estimates, even if China implements all of its green promises, renewables will reach only 18% in 2040, with 76% of its energy still coming from fossil fuels. So while the biggest country on the planet, right? Yeah, they have the highest population. Or is it India now? India now?
Yeah, but I mean, super close.
So either way, what if they're going to continue on this path, nothing we do matters, but we're just going to commit economic suicide for something that isn't going to create any of the results that they claim it's going to. So at that point, when you see these things and you know that they have this information, the only logical conclusion that you can come to is that there's another motive than saving the climate.
100%. The whole thing is ideological. We already know this. The challenge that I have, and like you said earlier, is why do the politicians and why do the media continue to push this forward? It's too deeply woven into all liberal policy and all liberal strategy. It really is. Like you said, it is their boogeyman, right? So every time you look at a political party, and sometimes this is shared across political parties, they need a boogeyman to fight. They need you to need them to implement policy so they can save the world. That's what they always do. You look back, they said the world was going to drown in the 70s, the 90s, the early 2000s. You look at Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, 20 feet of water. God, they've been saying this for 50 fucking years, and not very little has changed. And I know we need to make adjustments and changes, but this is very sensationalized, and we don't have any strong science to support what they're saying. We only really have science to refute it. Really?
They'll write headlines saying things like, oh, X amount, and they'll toss out this big number, right? They'll say X amount of ice is melting in the Arctic right now per year. And it does sound like an alarming number, but when you realize how much ice is in the Arctic, it really puts things into perspective. So like even the UN climate panel found that even with a very large amount of heat, it would take 1,000 years or more to melt all of Greenland's ice. And then studies also indicated that even in the absence of climate policy, 60 to 70% of the Greenland ice sheet would be around in 1,000 years. So
Right.
like this whole narrative, you see these headlines get tossed out like crazy. It's literally just there to try to create anxiety.
100%.
Yeah.
And for you to follow the rules and implement policy and do this and do that and do what you're told. It's just basically what this whole thing is about. So that being the case, that's why you're seeing the media and these politicians continue to stand on this soapbox, and they are not getting off anytime soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to head over to our Substack in order to discuss some of our little bit more tinfoil hat ideas about
The Trump assassination.
the Trump assassination, as well as going over some of the history of CIA and American deep state assassinations around the world. So if you would like to join us there, you can find the link to our Substack in the description below. And for those who don't, we'll catch you next time.
Hi, everybody.